Hello, welcome to this video on corporate aims and objectives. So what's the point of this video? Well, we're going to learn about three things here: mission statements, corporate aims, and corporate objectives. Look at the differences, the purposes, and some examples. So let's start off with a few basic examples just to illustrate these three different concepts. We're going to start off with a corporate aim. And an aim is really where a business wants to go in the future, and it's a statement of purpose. For example, we want to grow the business into Europe would be an example of an aim. An objective is more of a target that we can state and then importantly measure whether we've achieved that. So for example, we want to achieve sales of 10 million euros in European markets in 2004. A mission statement sets out the business vision. It's really the underlying basis or reason for that business's existence and sends an important message to stakeholders. And there's a hierarchy here. What we have is we have at the top the mission statement, which feeds into the corporate aim. So the mission statement really is the overall reason for the business's existence. Why does it exist? And this informs us of our aims. What is the long-term plan to fulfill this mission statement? And then from those aims, we can generate objectives. Well, if that's the aim, what are the targets that we need to fulfill? And we can check whether we've fulfilled them, they're quantifiable. And then in the long term, or as a result of that, what strategies do we need to achieve these objectives, to achieve our aim, to fulfill our mission statement? So let's start at the top here with the mission statement. What is a mission statement? It is the overriding purpose of the business. It's the reason for its existence. It gives some idea of the strategic perspective, what the strategy is going to be in the future, what we want to get to, and it supports the stated vision for the future. Let's think about what a mission statement is not. It's not a statement of goals or objectives. It's not a statement of core values. And it's not a statement of how the business intends to compete or position itself in the market. The audience for a mission statement is really the stakeholders in the business. It could be employees, customers, members of society, investors, managers, suppliers, creditors. So let's have a look at some examples. So here's our first example. Our vision is to create a better everyday life for the many people. That's the statement for this business. Can you guess who this business is? Bit of a tough one to start off with, but that's IKEA. This one, to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. Can you guess what this one is? Well, there's a little bit more of a clue in this one with the cup, but this is the mission statement of Starbucks. To be Earth's most customer-centric company where people can find and discover anything they want to buy online. Any ideas? Remember, this is the vision of the business, what it's trying to achieve. Amazon. To refresh the world in mind, body, and spirit. To inspire moments of optimism. To create value and make a difference. Coca-Cola. Transportation as reliable as running water. Everywhere for everyone. This is the mission of Uber. To bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Can you guess? To make it easy to do business everywhere. And that's Alibaba. So we've looked at mission statements here and looked at some examples. Now let's move on to aims and objectives. We'll start with corporate aims. Corporate aims are the long-term goals that assist the business in setting their objectives. Typically, they're expressed following from the mission statement. So, for example, a corporate aim would become the world's leading sports brand, perhaps for Nike. And this can then allow a company to set objectives and targets off the back of that. So let's move on to corporate objectives. What is a corporate objective rather than an aim or a mission statement? This is the medium to long term, so sometime in the future, but not completely, for the life of the business. So medium term perhaps. And the key point here is quantifiable targets to fulfill the mission statement and fulfill the aims of the business. And you'll see over here to the right hand side, these objectives should be SMART, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on. So if we think about the objectives and where they fit into what the business wants to achieve, we've got an interesting diagram here, which typically the mission statement is quite strategic and not particularly detailed. We want to be the leading sports brand. You know, that's quite a big vision, but it's not much detail there. Like, what do we mean by the leading sports brand? So the mission statement tends to be quite strategic, but maybe not very detailed. And then we work our way down through the business. We get to our corporate aims and we get to our corporate objectives. And we can go even further from our corporate objectives down to different functions or departments with the business. We can go on to different teams, and we can then ultimately give individual members of staff objectives as well, or targets. So it's worth bearing in mind this hierarchy. So here's a more detailed example. We might have a corporate objective, which is to have a market share of 12% by 2020. Now, what does that mean for the marketing department, the function within the business? Well, in order to achieve the objective above, for the business as a whole, the corporate for the business as a whole, corporate objective, then we might need to have a target here of sales per customer, £45 per customer, achieved in the next 3 years. And what might this mean for the individual team or unit? It might mean that a shop has to have sales of £500,000 this year. So again, we have this idea, we have a mission statement at the top flowing down through aims and objectives, getting increasingly more detailed, but less strategic. So what are the purpose of corporate objectives? Well, they provide a focus for the business. We can measure performance of the business as a whole against the objectives. It informs decision making, which will be the best choice or best strategy to achieve these objectives. And then they can provide, as we've just seen, a framework for giving more detailed objectives to different departments like marketing or operations, or different teams, or even different individuals. So these are the typical likely areas of focus for an objective. They might be to do with the market, they might be to do with innovation, maybe improving productivity. Profitability is a very common one. It could be to do with employees, maybe even public responsibility, if we're thinking more along the lines of a social enterprise. So here's an example of a corporate objective. This is again Starbucks. Our objective is to maintain Starbucks standing as one of the most recognized and respected brands in the world. And I'd just like you to consider that objective for a second. Do you think this is a good objective for Starbucks? Now let's look at another one to compare. This is an example of objectives for businesses owned by Whitbread PLC, Premier Inn and Costa Coffee. And we can see at the bottom, our objective is to fill our ambition to reach circa 85,000 UK hotel rooms and £2.5 billion worth of sales in Costa by 2020. Now, if you compare that to the Starbucks objective, which one would you say is the better objective for the business? And lots of people would argue that this one here is actually the better objective. Why is that? It's because it follows the principles of a SMART objective. And a SMART is a good way of thinking about effective objectives, making sure they're good objectives. And what do we mean by SMART? Well, we mean this acronym here. First of all, we mean that the objective is specific. So it should state exactly what is to be achieved. For example, new hotels or sales. Is it measurable? Yes. £2.5 billion or 85,000. Is it realistic and achievable? Is it relevant to the business? And again, have we got a time frame? 2020. And if the objective is SMART, then it's easy for us to measure whether this objective has been achieved. It's easy for people to understand it. So it's a good thing to bear in mind for business people when setting objectives, to try and make them SMART. If we drill down a bit further, we talked about corporate aims and corporate objectives. That's for the business as a whole. We sometimes break those down further and give what is known as functional objectives. And that corresponds to different departments within the business. So for example, we might have the finance department, the marketing department, the human resources department, operations department, however the business has decided to organize itself. And when we have objectives for each of these different areas, they can relate to the objectives for the business as a whole to ensure that they're being achieved. Let's have a look at some examples. So, for example, we might have an objective here that the business wants to increase sales. Now, what does that mean for the marketing department? We might break it down and say it means successfully launching 5 new products in the next 2 years. We might have another objective that is for the business as a whole to reduce costs. Now, what might that mean for the operations department? It might mean that we need to increase productivity of our input factors by 10%. And we can go further. We might have another objective here to increase cash flow. For the finance department, that might be reducing debtor days from 75 to 60. And we can see at the bottom there, improve customer satisfaction. Human resources might be something to do with improving the levels of customer service. So again, we can take these corporate objectives and translate them into different objectives for each different area of the business so that that main objective, the corporate objective, is achieved. So in this video, we've looked at mission statements, corporate aims, corporate objectives, some examples, the purpose, and what makes them effective. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.